Animal Farm by George Orwell. Episode 5. Narrated by Wormhole Podcast. As winter settled over Animal Farm, not everything was running as smoothly as you might hope. There was one animal in particular who seemed to be losing interest in the whole revolution business. Her name was Molly, and she was a pretty white horse who cared far more about her appearance than about building a new society. Molly was always late for work, always complaining of mysterious aches and pains. But the other animals began to suspect something more troubling was going on. You see, Molly had been spotted near the boundary fence, talking to men from the neighboring human farms. Clover, the kind, motherly horse, decided to investigate. She went to Molly's stall and searched through the straw. And there, hidden beneath the bedding, she found Molly's secret: lumps of sugar and colorful ribbons, gifts from humans. 3 days later, Molly vanished from the farm entirely. The pigeons eventually brought news. They had spotted her in town, pulling a fancy red and black cart. A fat human man was stroking her nose and feeding her sugar, and she wore a bright scarlet ribbon in her mane. She looked happy, the pigeons said, and after that, none of the animals ever spoke of Molly again. Now, Molly's departure might seem like a small thing, but it tells us something important about this story. Not everyone wanted the same things from the revolution. Some animals wanted freedom and equality, while others just wanted comfort and pretty things. But far bigger conflicts were brewing on the farm. January brought bitter cold, and the ground froze too hard to work. So the animals spent their time in the big barn, holding meetings to plan for the coming year. The pigs, being the cleverest animals, had naturally taken charge of all the planning. But there was a problem. The two leading pigs could not agree on anything. The white pig was called Snowball. He was quick, clever, and full of ideas. When he spoke at meetings, his words painted vivid pictures that swept the other animals up in excitement. He had plans to make the farm better, more efficient, more wonderful than anyone had ever imagined. The dark pig was Napoleon. He rarely spoke at meetings, and when he did, his words were brief and unimpressive. But Napoleon had a different kind of power. Between meetings, he would visit animals one by one, quietly building support, making promises, remembering favors. Napoleon was especially good at winning over the sheep. He taught them a simple slogan: 4 legs good, 2 legs bad. And the sheep would bleat this phrase over and over, especially when Snowball was trying to make an important point. They didn't understand what they were saying, but they said it loudly, and that was enough to drown out any debate. But the biggest disagreement between the two pigs was about something called the windmill. Now, a windmill might not sound very exciting, but to Snowball, it represented everything the revolution could become. He had surveyed the farm and found the perfect spot, a small hill where the wind always blew strong and steady. Snowball's plan was ambitious. The windmill would generate electricity, something the animals had never had before. It would light their stalls in winter, run machines to cut their food, even milk the cows automatically. Imagine, he told them, working only 3 days a week while machines did the rest. Snowball threw himself into designing the windmill. He found old books in the farmhouse about building and electricity. Day after day, he worked in a small shed, drawing complicated plans on the wooden floor with chalk held between his trotters. The drawings grew and grew until they covered half the floor in a maze of wheels and gears. All the animals came to look at Snowball's plans. They couldn't understand the complicated drawings, but they were impressed nonetheless. Even the hens and ducks visited, carefully stepping around the chalk lines. Only Napoleon stayed away, showing no interest at all in the windmill plans. Well, Napoleon stayed away until one particular day. He arrived at the shed unexpectedly, walked slowly around the plans, and examined every detail. The other animals held their breath, wondering if Napoleon had finally decided to support the project. Then, without saying a word, Napoleon lifted his leg and urinated all over Snowball's drawings. Now, you might think this was just crude behavior, but it was actually a message. Napoleon was saying, without words, that he thought Snowball's dreams were worthless. The farm divided into two camps, those who believed in Snowball's vision of a better future, and those who trusted Napoleon's promise of a full food supply right now. There was only one animal who refused to choose a side. Benjamin the donkey, the oldest animal on the farm, said it didn't matter who won. Windmill or no windmill, he said, life would go on as it always had. Which is to say, badly. Finally, the day came to vote on the windmill. It was a Sunday morning, and all the animals gathered in the big barn. Snowball stood up first and gave a passionate speech about everything the windmill could mean for their future. His words were so powerful that animals who had been uncertain began nodding along. Then Napoleon rose to speak. He said only that the windmill was nonsense and that nobody should vote for it. Then he sat down again. He had spoken for barely 30 seconds, and he didn't seem to care whether anyone agreed with him. Snowball leaped back up, more passionate than ever. He painted a glorious picture of the farm's future, machines doing all the hard work, every stall lit and heated, hot and cold running water for everyone. By the time he finished, it was clear which way the vote would go. Snowball had won the argument. But then Napoleon did something unexpected. He stood up and made a strange, high-pitched sound, a kind of whimper that none of the animals had ever heard before. It was a signal, and what happened next changed everything. From outside came a terrible sound of baying and barking. 9 enormous dogs burst into the barn, their brass-studded collars glinting. They were huge, fierce as wolves, and they headed straight for Snowball. The white pig barely escaped their snapping jaws, leaping from the platform just in time. Snowball ran for his life. He raced across the long pasture toward the road, running as fast as a pig can run. The dogs were right behind him, their teeth snapping at his heels. Once he stumbled, and it seemed like they had him, but he scrambled up and ran even faster. At the very last moment, with the lead dog's jaws closing on his tail, Snowball squeezed through a small hole in the hedge. And then he was gone. The animals never saw Snowball again. Their brilliant, dreaming leader had been chased away by dogs, and no one had done anything to stop it. The animals crept back into the barn, silent and terrified. They finally understood where the dogs had come from. These were the puppies Napoleon had taken away from their mothers long ago, the ones he said he would educate privately. He had raised them in secret, and now they were his personal army. Napoleon climbed onto the raised platform where the old founder of the revolution had once stood. He announced that Sunday meetings were over. From now on, he said, a special committee of pigs would make all decisions. The other animals would simply receive their orders each week. Some of the animals wanted to protest. Even Boxer, the strong but simple horse, tried to gather his thoughts to object. 4 young pigs actually stood up and began to speak out. But the dogs growled deep in their throats, and the protesters fell silent immediately. Then the sheep started up their chanting. 4 legs good, 2 legs bad, they bleated, over and over for 15 minutes straight. By the time they stopped, any chance of discussion had passed. The animals had lost their democracy without quite understanding how. Later, a small pig named Squealer was sent to explain things to the confused animals. Squealer had a special talent for making bad things sound reasonable. He told them that Napoleon had made a great sacrifice by taking on the burden of leadership. After all, he said, sometimes animals might make the wrong decisions on their own. Suppose you had decided to follow Snowball, Squealer said, his voice dripping with false concern. Snowball, who was no better than a criminal. Someone mentioned that Snowball had fought bravely in the battle against the humans. Bravery is not enough, Squealer replied smoothly. Loyalty and obedience are more important. Then Squealer used the most powerful argument of all. Surely, comrades, you don't want the human farmer Jones to come back. That question silenced every doubt. Whatever Napoleon did, at least he wasn't Jones. Boxer, the loyal horse who worked harder than anyone, finally spoke. If Comrade Napoleon says it, it must be right. From that day forward, Boxer had a new motto to go with his old one. Along with, "I will work harder," he now said, "Napoleon is always right." Spring came, and new routines were established. Every Sunday, the animals assembled to receive their orders for the week. The skull of the old pig who had started the revolution was dug up and placed by the flagpole. The animals had to bow to it before entering the barn, turning their founder into something like a religious symbol. And then, just 3 weeks after chasing Snowball away, Napoleon made a surprising announcement. The windmill would be built after all. He gave no explanation for changing his mind. He simply said the work would be hard and might require smaller food rations. That evening, Squealer explained the truth to the bewildered animals. Napoleon, he said, had actually invented the windmill idea in the first place. Snowball had stolen the plans from Napoleon's own papers. Napoleon had only pretended to oppose the windmill as a clever trick to get rid of Snowball. This, Squealer explained with a knowing smile, is something called tactics. He repeated the word several times, skipping back and forth, as if that made it clearer. The animals weren't sure what tactics meant, but Squealer spoke so convincingly, and the 3 dogs with him growled so threateningly, that nobody asked any more questions. And so the animals accepted this new version of events. History was rewritten right before their eyes, and they let it happen. They had traded one kind of master for another. The only difference was that this master was one of their own. This chapter of our story shows us how easily freedom can be lost. Not through dramatic battles, but through small surrenders. Through fear of speaking up. Through accepting comfortable lies because the truth is too frightening to face. The animals had dreamed of a farm where all animals were equal. But some animals, it seemed, were already becoming more equal than others. And the windmill that had represented hope for a better future would now be built under very different circumstances. But that is a story for another time.